Right now, somewhere in the world, billions of people are sitting down to eat, and on nearly every table sits one of the most debated objects human beings have ever put on a table. For centuries, society argued about whether this object should even exist. Rulers were mocked for using one, scholars wrote furiously against it, and ordinary people refused to touch one for generations. This is the secret life of the fork, and what you're about to discover will change the way you look at your dinner table forever. To understand why the fork caused such chaos, we need to go back, way back, to a world where forks simply did not exist. For most of human history, people ate with three things: their fingers, a knife, and a piece of bread. That was the complete toolkit. No forks, no napkins, no elaborate table settings, just hands. And hunger. The ancient Romans built roads that still exist today. They engineered aqueducts that carried water across entire mountains. They created legal systems that still shape modern law. And they ate every meal with their bare hands. This wasn't considered primitive. For thousands of years, this was simply how humans ate. Every civilization, every empire, every king, and every peasant. So, where did the fork actually come from? The answer leads us to one of the wealthiest, most sophisticated cities in the medieval world. Constantinople, capital of the Byzantine Empire, a city of gold mosaics, marble palaces, and dining customs so refined, they made the rest of medieval Europe look like it was still living in a cave. In the early 1000s, a Byzantine noblewoman arrived in Venice to marry into one of the most powerful families in Italy. She brought silks, jewels, perfumes, but she also brought something nobody in Venice had ever seen at a dinner table. A small golden instrument with two prongs. She used it to lift food delicately to her lips, without once touching it with her fingers. The Venetians, it said, watched in stunned silence. The reaction was not admiration. It was bewilderment, followed by outrage. Chroniclers of the era wrote about her with genuine alarm. They argued that humans had been given perfectly functioning hands, and that inventing an artificial instrument to avoid using them was a sign of troubling excess and vanity. She died young not long after, from a plague sweeping the region. Some clergy of the time pointed to her habits as proof of living outside accepted norms. Whether that judgment was ever fair is something historians still argue about. What's certain is this: the fork's reputation in Europe never quite recovered from that moment. For generations after that, the fork remained deeply controversial in Europe. It wasn't just one person's opinion. Across universities, royal courts, and dining halls, the fork was treated with genuine suspicion. And the reason, when you understand the historical context, is actually quite logical. Medieval European society had very specific ideas about what was natural, and what was an unnecessary deviation from the established order. Eating with your hands was natural. It was how every human in history had eaten. Introducing a metal instrument with sharp pointed ends into that equation felt to many people like a solution to a problem that didn't exist. And in a world where dinner guests routinely carried daggers to the table, handing everyone an additional sharp implement didn't feel like progress. It felt dangerous. At the French royal court in the 1500s, attempts to bring the fork into fashion met open resistance. Noblemen argued that real strength and confidence didn't require such delicate instruments, that a man of standing ate the way men had always eaten. Enthusiasm for the fork in certain court circles was considered, at best, eccentric, at worst, embarrassing. In England, the situation reached almost comedic levels. When forks began appearing in English homes in the early 1600s, the reaction from writers and satirists of the day was not kind. Fork users were mocked as people who considered themselves too refined for the realities of ordinary life. The implication was clear. If you used a fork, you thought you were better than everyone else. And in 17th century England, that was not a reputation you wanted. And yet, beneath all the mockery and resistance, was a very practical concern that nobody liked to admit openly. The fork had sharp tines. It looked, undeniably, like a small weapon. At a time when violence at dinner tables was not entirely unheard of, the idea of normalizing a pointed metal instrument at every place setting gave cautious people genuine pause. The fork wasn't just controversial because it was new. It was controversial because, in the wrong hands, it could draw blood. Here's the version of this story you've probably heard. In 1533, a 14-year-old girl named Catherine de' Medici left Florence, Italy, to marry the future king of France, and the story goes that she brought Italian cooks, Italian manners, Italian forks, changing how France ate, forever. It's a wonderful story. There's just one problem. Food historians who've actually gone looking for evidence say it doesn't hold up. The claim that Catherine personally introduced the fork to France is considered a myth, one that didn't even appear in writing until centuries after she died. What actually happened is in some ways a better story. Over the course of the 1500s, the fork spread through the French aristocracy, not because anyone proved the critics wrong, not because the arguments against it were ever formally defeated. It spread the way fashion always spreads in a royal court, because someone powerful used one, and nobody wanted to be the person who didn't. The fork had won, not through reason, but through the oldest force in human society, the desire to belong. Once the aristocracy embraced the fork, Europe's greatest craftsmen competed to create the most extraordinary designs: forks with 4 tines instead of 2, carved ivory handles, solid silver construction, gold inlay detailing. Some forks cost more than an entire working family earned in a year. The object that had been called a dangerous extravagance had become the ultimate symbol of refinement and status in less than a century. But here is where the story takes its most uncomfortable turn. For ordinary people, the fork remained completely out of reach for another 100 years. Working families across Europe continued eating with their hands well into the 1700s. The fork didn't just separate food from fingers. For 2 full centuries, it separated the wealthy from everyone else, those who could afford refinement from those who could not. The fork was not merely a utensil, it was a statement of social power. Now, the part of the story that will genuinely make you pause the next time you pick one up. The fork you use today has 4 tines, but for most of its history, forks had only 2. Sharp, pointed, weapon-like, the 4-tined fork we consider standard today wasn't widely adopted until the 1800s. For most of its history, the fork looked considerably more like something you'd carry into battle than something you'd use at breakfast. The man credited with introducing the fork to England was an eccentric traveler named Thomas Coriat. He encountered forks during his travels through Italy in 1608 and was so genuinely astonished by them that he brought one home and wrote extensively about it. His friends nicknamed him Furcifer, the fork carrier. It was not intended as a compliment. Thomas Coriat was essentially mocked for being excited about a piece of cutlery. He didn't care. He kept using his fork. When the United States declared independence in 1776, forks were still considered a European luxury by a significant portion of the population. George Washington owned forks. Thomas Jefferson was famously enthusiastic about elegant dining, but ordinary American families continued eating primarily with knives and spoons well into the early 1800s. The fork took longer to conquer America than it took to cross the entire Atlantic Ocean. By the Victorian era, the pendulum had swung to the complete opposite extreme. The aristocracy's obsession with forks had become almost satirical. Wealthy households maintained separate forks for every conceivable food: a fish fork, a salad fork, a dessert fork, an oyster fork, a strawberry fork, a pickle fork. One Victorian etiquette manual catalogued more fork varieties than most people could keep straight, each with its own placement rules and social significance. Using the wrong fork at a Victorian dinner party was considered one of the most mortifying social failures a person could commit. From instrument of controversy to social minefield, the fork had done it all. And finally, the most humbling fact of all: the fork, which took European civilization centuries to fully accept, was defeated almost immediately by the absence of gravity. In space, without gravity to keep food on the tines, the fork becomes essentially useless. NASA engineers spent considerable effort developing sealed food pouches, magnetic trays, and specially designed zero-gravity utensils. An object that survived the judgment of kings and scholars couldn't survive its first trip beyond the atmosphere. The next time you sit down to eat, pick up your fork. Really look at it. In that simple object is centuries of human stubbornness, of societies so committed to the familiar that they resisted something as harmless as a new way of lifting food for generation after generation. It took the most powerful empires in history, the most brilliant scholars, the most confident kings, to look at a two-pronged golden instrument and decide that it was simply too much change to accept. And it took generations of ordinary people quietly copying what the people above them were doing, one dinner at a time, to unravel centuries of resistance. Not a single decree, not one decisive moment, just imitation, spreading slowly, the way most change in history actually happens. Today, billions of people pick up a fork 3 times a day, without a single thought about the noble woman who scandalized Venice with hers, the king whose own court laughed at him for trying one, the traveler who was mocked just for bringing one home. The most ordinary objects carry the most extraordinary weight. You just have to know where to look. Here on Wonder Raft, we look, subscribe, and we will see you on the next one.